Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, this is NATO 2020, a new podcast series pitching fresh ideas for the world's oldest military alliance. I'm your host, Terry Schultz, and I've covered NATO for a long time, so I know a lot about how it's been doing things, but this is how it could be doing things differently. The Atlantic Council commissioned a series of 20 recommendations as to how the 70-year-old alliance could freshen up a bit heading into the next decade. Some of these are ideas we've heard before. Some of them are brand new. All of them are aimed at helping the alliance be more resilient and responsive to the threats that definitely get more creative all the time. Each week, I'm going to be digging into some of these ideas with their authors. In this episode, the recommendation is to supersize cyber. And the authors are Safa Shawan-Edwards and Simon Handler, who are both from the Scowcroft Center's Cyber Statecraft Initiative. Thanks for joining me, Safa and Simon.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much, Terry.
So I don't know which one wants to get stuck with this task, but for anyone who hasn't read the paper, one of you give me your elevator pitch.
Absolutely. I'm happy to dive in briefly. So generally, when we talk about burden sharing within NATO, the focus has, for the most part, been on member states spending 2% of their GDPs on defense. But it's really vital that NATO member states get more serious about how they spend on defense. So looking at the threat landscape, we see adversaries that are increasingly focused on digital and the information spaces. So it makes sense for NATO to prioritize this in its strategy. And then they need to follow that strategy with resources. So what we're saying is that NATO should adopt a 0.2% commitment on digital defense spending. And drilling down just a bit deeper, we suggest digital spending be in three distinct categories. We have enabling offensive capabilities on the battlefield. We have defending digital systems ranging from laptops to combat aircraft, and we have transforming the IT infrastructure of the alliance. So overall, 0.2%, yes, it's aggressive, it's an ambitious commitment, but it would really anchor states to truly meaningful contributions toward modernization.
That was pretty concise. Okay, so I will now just start asking my questions because, of course, as I do in each episode, I read through the paper and I say, I'm not sure about this. That's not really how NATO manages to get things done. And in this case, so cyber is something, of course, that is extremely crucial, and nobody argues that. Nobody would tell you that NATO shouldn't supersize cyber. But will it? You know, I mean, it's been now a few years since cyber became an operational domain. And yet, if they're not there right now with the constant threats, the constant cyber threats and attacks that the alliance gets every day, why would they do it now? Why not, like back in 2016 when it became a domain? You know, why not in 2018 when they approved the cyber defense pledge?
Right. Well,
you can say now because we proposed it.
That's exactly what
Nobody's
what I was
ever written a paper like this.
Well, sure. No one's ever thought of this before. We just proposed it, but really, we just experienced a once-in-a-generation compromise. Looking at the SolarWinds breach, there have been about a dozen or so U.S. government agencies that have been compromised that we know of, plus countless private sector organizations. So there's that. The threat is imminent, and our adversaries are constantly trying to compromise. The only other thing that I will say is that the fact that we have an incoming administration in the United States definitely provides a strategic opportunity. And considering that the Biden administration has indicated a strong commitment to the transatlantic alliance and working with allies and partners, what better time than now with the SolarWinds breach and the urgency of the moment to invest in digital transformation.
Okay, Safa, I'm going to make you do the money question then. So we all know how well the 2% metric has worked. I mean, yes, allies are spending more, but it has become just this incredibly divisive point among allies, due in most part, of course, to Trump's obsession with it. But you're proposing to add yet another financial metric here. And I can't imagine that you're going to get allies to go on board with that. Just hearing 2% gives them, some of them, sort of flashbacks to the Merkel breakfast.
Totally cognizant of that. And I guess our criticism of the existing 2% metric isn't quite about the metric per se, but really it's more about its lack of detail and direction. The 0.2% metric, on the other hand, aims to ensure that NATO maintains relevance and value for member states for years to come.
So does the 2%. Sorry. That's what the 2% aims to do as well.
It totally does. But at the same time, the 2% metric does not provide the detail and direction that as our metric does, especially reflecting the dependence of member states that they have on technology and on cyberspace and on digitized tools.
So you think that it's just too broad, saying you just need to aim towards being well equipped and being ready to respond? You think that they left too much direction in how you get to 2% or what you spend the 2% on?
Yeah, essentially, yes. What we do think is that we need to ensure that member states are making these long-term investments that will pay dividends in the long term and ensure that NATO maintains relevance and value for them, and ensures that they have resilience and security across the entire alliance.
Okay, but let's look at this from NATO's perspective. It can suggest those things, but all of these capabilities are within the realm of the government itself. I mean, this is what the EU runs into as well when it puts out recommendations. Sure, you can say you need that, but they can't control the government spending or the decisions about what they do get in their defense budgets, that may even be like civil security budget.
Absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely true. And I guess what NATO has a unique opportunity here since no member state yet has taken control or has taken ownership of this issue on cyber and defense spending. They have a unique opportunity right now to step up to the plate and take ownership of this and try to push nation states in that direction. At the same time, getting nation states to spend a lot of money on cybersecurity and digital tools can be a hard sell, but it's not really a hard sell after an event like NotPetya, which cost over $2 billion.
Okay, but why didn't it happen after NotPetya then?
I think for a multitude of reasons. I think, it's a lack of guidance sometimes, or it's a lack of putting resources behind strategies and following through when it's not politically viable sometimes. We do think that NATO taking ownership of this can help provide some guidance and provide some political viability for individual governments to make these decisions and investments.
So walk me through what that would look like, because they have commitments. Including, and we'll talk more about this because I found it fascinating to go back and read the Cyber Defense Pledge, but they have commitments. How would NATO take ownership of this, as you're saying? I mean, they would pass some new document, probably at the next summit, if it moved that quickly. And then what happens?
I think, providing some more guidance and specifically on how nation states should be spending their money can be much more effective in terms of not just telling people that they should be spending money on cybersecurity and cyber defense, but looking at 3 particular areas that we outlined in our paper, specifically 1, enabling offensive cyber capabilities on the battlefield, 2, defense of its digital systems, and then 3, digital transformation across all 30 member states. The third piece is really crucial here. Digital transformation is all the rage right now. Governments are focusing very, very heavily on digital statecraft, and the COVID-19 pandemic has only underlined the importance of being able to provide government services digitally, and being able to defend that as well, and devoting resources to defend those functions is also really important. So there's not just NATO telling people to do this, but there's also a lot of buy-in there's more buy-in than we would probably anticipate normally coming from member states right now.
But what kind of follow-up do you have? What kind of enforcement? And when you say a commitment, would it be wishy-washy language like the Wales Pledge, where it is they aim to move towards? I mean, there's an awful lot of wiggle room there. So are you thinking of making this more binding? And if so, how?
So that's for the NATO experts to decide how we're going to make it more binding. But we're here saying that this is what NATO should propose, and this is what member states should stick to. And I think that they're going to be pretty happy that they stuck to it in the long run.
Well, I think that's probably true, but you still have, I mean, since they started basically looking at what each other does in cyber, you have some countries so far behind the But I don't even understand how NATO thinks it has a cyber strategy, because as we all know, you're only as strong as your weakest link truly in cyber, because you are linked. And, if you can hack into one country's database, even if it's not completely tied in with NATO's information, there will be some stuff there that would be awfully attractive, right? So you have some countries that are going to be so far behind the others. How would you even measure this?
Well, this, depending on the country, ranging from around a 2 to 3 time increase in cyber expenditures between these 3 categories that we're proposing. Look, you're right. Some countries are going to spend more. The United States is kind of an outlier here. Its national defense budget is in the ballpark of $700 billion or so. It's going to have a lot more of that dedicated to digital defense spending than some of the smaller countries. But at the end of the day,
and everybody should look at the map in your paper. It's pretty impressive to look at where you figured out how much money that would be. I think it was $40 billion for the U.S.
It was $40 billion, which sounds like a crazy number. But again, looking at the $700 billion total defense budget, it starts to make a little bit more sense, especially taking into account that the JEDI contract, as an example, which is a cloud contract that is still in the process of being awarded, is a $10 billion expenditure in itself. So these numbers start to add up.
So one of my questions was, would they be able to incorporate in your proposal, would they be able to incorporate what they already spend, measure what they already spend? And I mean, maybe the US is at that amount, is at 0.2%. How close are they? I mean, that's the one that's probably closest.
That's a great question. Just to jump in here real quick, it's hard to say right now what the United States is at, but I think that just underscores the importance of having a devoted 0.2% towards digital spending. It's really important across the board to identify the key threats and address them accordingly. So we got to follow up that strategy with resources, like we said earlier.
And I mean, there's a lot of talk. I mean, I hate to keep bringing you back to the 2% when you really want to talk about the 0.2%. A lot of talk about restructuring how the 2% is calculated. And many countries have said they would like their cyber security expenditures to be included in the 2%. So do you think that would help make people more in favor of having yet another measurement? Although I understand that you say they're going to be positive about it anyway. This might just sort of put some icing on it.
Yeah, so we are certainly open to the possibility of member states, rolling in that 0.2% into the larger 2% earmarked for the defense spending. But again, the way that we envision this it's not meant to be an exercise on how much money a government can spend, but more about encouraging governments to be intentional about how they spend and invest their resources in a way that will pay dividends down the line. In the long term, creating more collective security, creating a more cyber-ready workforce, and increasing cyber defense.
We're talking about doing this nationally, of course, because that's the way most things happen for NATO. But how would that be NATO operation then? Are you thinking that this would somehow put under the umbrella of the cyber offices that NATO already has, or perhaps down at SHAPE, or how would that actually be integrated into NATO itself? Would there be centralized planning and supervision and coordination?
We did consider how NATO could take a more proactive role in terms of providing guidance and structure to member states in terms of how they envision their resources and invest those resources and spend their money. So that certainly can happen within NATO. We haven't decided exactly just yet where that should live within the organization, but we do think that NATO should take a proactive role in terms of providing guidance and benchmarks for nation states in terms of how they spend their money. Tara, you highlighted just the vast differences that nation states can have in terms of where they are currently now with spending and capabilities, and where, for example, the US or the UK is. NATO can play a very, very important role there, providing that guidance and providing that structure for them to get a better sense of where they should be investing their resources to have the maximum impact.
You also suggest that this would be different from the 2% in another way, because it wouldn't be one member state, and we all know which one that is, telling NATO to do this, because it would be NATO telling itself to do this. But I think that overlooks the fact that every single ally agreed to the 2% as well at Wales. I mean, I think it was under duress, and the language, the fact that the language isn't tougher than it is. Even these specific words were a huge fight. But I mean, it shouldn't, even that shouldn't be considered just one ally telling the others to do it. But don't you think this would again end up being the U.S., which is, I mean, looser with its purse strings on defense spending? It still would end up being the U.S. telling the other countries that they needed to live up to this, wouldn't it?
I actually don't think so, for a multitude of reasons. I think, for one, member states are definitely cognizant of how much they depend on cyberspace and technology in order to execute very basic government functions. If there was a cyber attack on, say, one member state, the impacts of that would be immediately felt. There is an understanding of the importance of investing in cyber defense. Because of that, it's not one issue for one member state. It's an issue that impacts all member states.
But I haven't seen them move ahead, even knowing the risks now. And even the SolarWinds attack may not be the galvanizing event that you hope it is, and that it should be, perhaps.
That's a really, really good point.
I mean, what more will it take? Simon, I think it's your turn. You talked about SolarWinds, and you said it was a once in a generation event. It may be until now, sure, but we didn't see NATO, call a knack about it or anything.
But they should. That's what we're saying. No, and we wrote this before SolarWinds. We found out about SolarWinds. We think that it's not just the big events that you hear about, but member states are under threat and constantly defending against intrusion attempts from adversaries every day, constantly. So we just think it's time, SolarWinds or not, to invest in this type of digital defense spending.
So then I looked at the promises that were made in Warsaw in 2016, where they already said that they were going to work together more on cyber and invest more in cyber. And some of the promises they made were things like we will develop the fullest range of capabilities. Sorry, I have to read this. To defend our national infrastructures and networks. They're addressing cyber defense at the highest strategic level within our defense-related organizations, further integrating cyber defense into operations, extending coverage to deployable networks, allocating adequate resources nationally. Shall I go on? This commitment already exists. So, I mean, adding a financial aspect to it, I don't see how that would be enough of a motivation to make them actually do these things. And you must have looked into it. I mean, are they beneath the surface where I wouldn't see it actually doing all these things? I take it from you that they're not.
I think we have examples of member states investing where we're telling them to. Right now, I mentioned JEDI. The UK Ministry of Defense also has a Microsoft Azure contract, much smaller than JEDI. But there is will to invest in this area, or in these three areas that we lay out. I think setting an aggressive goal like this makes total sense. And I think, like Safa pointed to earlier, countries are going to be happy that they did this. They're going to, when the cost is too great not to invest. When we look at just on the civilian side, you're looking at like NotPetya was estimated by the White House to cost in excess of $10 billion. So the economic, the strategic, and the societal costs of not investing in these areas is just far too great. So we think that investing in digital defense spending right now is going to save a lot more money down the road. Also, just to throw in one more thing, investing in and leveraging data and the type of digital transformation that we talk about in one of the three buckets is just going to lead to more efficiencies and cost savings in the long run as well.
But I guess my point is more that they already have these pledges. They've already made these promises. And so coming up with a new plan would make it seem redundant, or it would make it seem like the first one wasn't heartfelt. I mean, you list the pledge in your paper. So doesn't that already commit them to doing the things you're suggesting they do now?
I think yes. So yes, it does. So we are, but I think it's more about recommitting to those principles and to those priorities when it comes to cyber defense spending, but at the same time, really focusing on backing that up with resources. Saying that we are going to devote resources to this is not nearly enough. We need to get specific. How much are countries going to spend on this? We need to be very specific about this because, as we all know, if it's something is of high importance, how do we demonstrate that it's of high importance? We have budgets for that. We can put money behind it.
That's it. What about? I mean, they do annual reviews of what kind of resources they each have and how well those contribute to NATO's needs. I mean, would you suggest putting it under that review process, that they would then sort of have to tick some boxes on how they're coming along on improving their capabilities?
I think so. I think that could be a really helpful mechanism just to have a regular check-in in terms of understanding where member states currently are at, where are they going? Are they making progress? But more importantly, that could be a very effective exercise in terms of ensuring that member states have shared trust and they know they can rely on one another, not just for traditional security, collective security, but also for collective security in cyberspace.
And do you think that they would take upgrading these capabilities more seriously than tanks or guns or, I don't know, ISR or things like this that they already need to do and know that they need to do? I mean, I think cyber is so critical. You know, we talk a lot at NATO about how, you know, a single incident in space could completely wipe out, you know, a lot of the capabilities that the alliance has, including on the battlefield, you know, which would fall under cybersecurity. So, but I just haven't seen this rush to upgrade that fulfilling your supersize suggestion would require. I mean, I guess you agree. Because otherwise you wouldn't have to suggest it.
And I think that's where we would point to NATO and say this is an opportunity for NATO to be a leader in this space and provide that guidance to member states, saying this is really important. And in order to demonstrate that we value this and this is of importance to us and to our alliance, we are going to now start devoting resources to it. So not just saying something's important, but also ensuring that you are protecting it by devoting resources and budget to it.
So one of the problems that NATO runs into when it comes to sharing intelligence of any kind and probably also entrusting a lot of their digital data to one another is trust between allies. Most of them trust the United States with data or with sensitive information more than they trust their next door neighbor. And that's always interesting. And it works out better in NATO than it does for the Europe on the European Union side, of course. But the fact that they don't trust each other, it causes problems in many spheres. And you mentioned that as well. And you think that this kind of a program would help create trust. Is that simply because people would feel that the cybersecurity is more bulletproof, sort of?
We hope that this would lead to better trust between member states. We're hopeful that the shared commitments in digital investments will foster a more collective security, and in turn lead to a greater culture of trust. I think, like you said, one of the big components of cyber threat intelligence is about information sharing between partners, and so we hope that if partners get serious about their investments in this area, and that's clear across the board with a pledge like the 0.2% commitment, that would help foster that culture of trust.
In your research, where did you see this lack of trust playing out? You obviously found instances where it was a hindrance, or you wouldn't have written about it.
I think that when we were thinking about this lack of trust, it was about this lack of understanding of what oneself is devoting to, what kind of resources oneself is devoting to cyber defense, cyber capabilities, and not being entirely sure where your fellow member state is, where they are in terms of their capabilities and what they are spending and how serious they take that. Our goal in this sense would be that everyone will be on the same page, understanding that, one, this is important to us. Two, we are devoting these resources and this certain benchmark and this metric to take this seriously and to develop our capabilities. And then three, because of that, we have a shared understanding of where we all stand. We're all on the same page. That increases trust, and that increases transparency as well.
Yeah, I mean, transparency would increase the trust for sure if that kind of information were available to neighboring countries. But to change all of these things is you're talking about a pretty long process. Not only getting the increased asset spending through the budget process, even once you got everybody on board politically, you still have to get through the finance ministers, which is a wall that defense runs into quite often. So, I mean, your timeline on this must be pretty long. I mean, small improvements could perhaps be made quickly, but to upgrade lots of systems with annual budgets, I mean, what kind of timeline are you thinking of where everybody would be enough at the same level that that there would be a much more solid defense wall in the cyber world?
That's another one of those questions that I would have to defer to the NATO nerds on. And we think this is important. We think that it should be implemented as soon as possible. Being realistic about the steps that go into making that happen is something that we'd have to defer to them on, I think.
Well, if not a timeline on when it could be accomplished, what about a timeline on when you think this could be presented seriously at NATO and have enough governments behind it that it would be actually come to an agreement?
I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom, but I do think after a cyber incident,
that's
or a
my
cyber
job,
crisis,
Safi. You can't do it.
Sorry, Terry. I do think that after a cyber crisis or a cyber incident, you could see lots of governments have a much higher tolerance or a greater deal of comfort in terms of devoting resources to this really important issue. We did see that. I believe it was Maersk after NotPetya. Their IT team doesn't have to try very hard to get budget increases. They've been hurt by this, and they're much more comfortable now with devoting resources to protect their cybersecurity. So there's that. So after a cyber incident or CSI, we can orchestrate one for them, and then try to get this on the books for tomorrow or next week. That's a joke.
But think about that. That's a private company doing it because it needs to protect its own assets, which, I mean, is very tangible.
So, Safa and Simon, we've got the Biden administration coming in, NATO allies very eager to have a new environment, a new kind of conversation. We all know that the 2% tough talk won't go away entirely, but it will certainly be done more respectfully. And, it's anybody's guess whether spending will continue increasing at the rates that it did when world leaders were afraid of being harassed by President Trump if they didn't do it. But do you think that this sort of improved conversation about 2% may provide an opening for a conversation about 0.2%? And would you expect that to be something the new administration will take up in one way or another, improve cyber capabilities?
Sure. We hope so. We hope that 2% or no 2%, we think that 0.2% should be spent on digital capabilities in our three areas that we described. Now, I think this just goes to show this is part of the reason people are so frustrated about the 2%, right? Like you mentioned, it doesn't make sense to spend for spending's sake. We are trying to earmark a portion of that to go towards the digital capabilities. Now, whether that turns into a larger conversation about what the threat landscape looks like and what percent we should be spending on other capabilities, that might make more sense. But regardless of the 2%, no 2%, I think our 0.2% makes a lot of sense for what we're seeing.
Just a quick question. How did you come up with the number?
I think we wanted something that had a ring to it. 2% is on everyone's minds. Everyone, when they think NATO, they think 2% of GDP. So to be consistent and to have a good ring, we stuck to 0.2%. That being said, I think this is not a conversation about getting people to spend more money. This is about starting a conversation about getting member states to think about how do they spend their money and how do they make these smarter long-term investments.
I mean, it's a great idea. I'm laughing because the 2% has been sort of a negative concept recently, but you're right. It linked together well. It was the first thing that came to my mind when I saw your number. So it works. We'll see how it plays out as the Biden administration renews its ties with NATO. So thank you very much, Safa Shuan-Edwards and Simon Handler from Scowcroft Center Cyber Statecraft Initiative for sharing their proposal for NATO to supersize cyber. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much, Terry.
Thanks for having us.
And you can find all 20 ideas at atlanticouncil.org and tell us what you think on Twitter at #StrongerWithAllies. Please join me next time.